Hey everyone, and welcome back to the 12 Days of ChrisBondmas and the final part of the Banjo-Kazooie review series. So after the success of Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie, there were whispers of the next installment being put into development. Shortly before the launch of the GameCube, there was a sizzle reel of various properties running on the new hardware, and a few seconds of this footage showed off several Banjo characters. However, this was just technical demo footage and not representative of a real game in development, and complicating the path to a third installment was the fact that 2 years after Rare released Banjo-Tooie, Rare was purchased by Microsoft. They moved several of their projects that were previously planned for the GameCube over to the Xbox and later the Xbox 360, and this included Grab by the Ghoulies and cameo Elements of Power, while another team at Rare got to work on releasing a sequel to the hit N64 game Perfect Dark as a launch title for the 360. These three games received mixed receptions and suffered low sales, and therefore Rare created another new IP at the time called Viva Pinata, which received better review scores but kinda suffered in sales. At long last, it was announced that Rare was bringing back Banjo and Kazooie with a teaser trailer released in 2007. The trailer had some questioning about the art style, as now the bear and bird looked a little different from their classic forms, while others hoped that the game would live up to the legacy of the N64 classics. The finished product would install mixed feelings from the fanbase, with some even writing it off before the release. To be fair, the warning signs were all there from the start. Rare made it clear that they had several ideas in place for a third game. One was to simply remake the original, now running on the 360, with slight changes to surprise players of the original. A second idea was to just make a platform in the same style as the first two, though that idea fell through rather quickly when the team felt it was too much of the same. And finally, there was the idea of using Lego-like parts to build vehicles to complete objectives. Gee, I wonder which one they went with. Though the biggest sign that things were going down a different path was an interview with designer Greg Mayles, who stated that fans look back fondly and want more of the same, but the Banjo of yesteryear has no place in tomorrow's market on the Xbox 360. Boy. Personally, I think they should have just gone on with making the standard platformer, because I don't think that genre is dead, because Mario's been doing just fine for 35 years, and he shows no sign of stopping. Hell, in hindsight now, there's been a bunch of friggin' Kickstarter games that are all platformers, so guess it's not that dead. Mel and the higher up at Microsoft probably felt that a platformer would not have been that financially successful, so they felt they needed to change the core foundation of the series to make it work. And look, innovation is great, and there's plenty of franchises that should be doing that, but Banjo and Kazooie only had 2 games under their belt, and I don't think the formula needed that big of a shakeup. But let's start with the plot before we deconstruct the gameplay, and I'll explain how I feel about these changes that were made. So after a brief narration recap of the last 2 games, and not Grunty's Revenge, which makes me feel that the position of that title in the canon is questionable at best, we pick up with Banjo and Kazooie 8 years later now. The pair have gotten fat, since now they haven't been on any adventures in the interim. They spend their time outside their house playing the Xbox 360 and eating pizza. Meanwhile, Gruntilda has finally bounced her way all the way back to Spiral Mountain after losing her body at the end of the last game. Gruntilda tries to get into a fight with the bear and bird when the action is stopped by Log, or the Lord of Games. Log is sick of the pair fighting and decides to put the pair through a series of challenges, and the winner will get Spiral Mountain while the loser will work in Log's video game factory forever. He starts by forcing the pair to collect random stuff, as he claims that the Banjo tradition is to collect as many pointless things as possible, and I want to stick my foot through Log's face. After coming to the realization that gamers just want to shoot things, he stops it and comes up with another challenge. First, he fixes Banjo and Kazooie by making them more fit for an adventure, and gives Gruntilda a robotic body to store a head in. Kazooie tries to get back the moves that the pair learned from the last 2 games, but Log claims that they won't need them, and that they were outdated anyway. Can I please kill Log instead of Grunty, because his elitist platformers are dead mentality is pissing me off. Log then brings the pair to Showdown Town. He explains that the goal will be for Banjo and Kazooie to enter his 5 game worlds and collect Jiggies, while Gruntilda tries to stop them. Since he took away the moveset from the last games, Log gives Kazooie a wrench and tells the pair that the only way to complete the challenges in each world that they're going to is to build vehicles. And this is really where the plot stops. Each game world has its own plot, but it's different from how it worked before. In the past 2 games, you kept progressing through each world and dealing with the characters in each world and how they related to their surroundings, but here it's... well, I'll explain in a minute. The worlds this time are Nutty Acres, a large farm-like area with an acorn farm, Logbox 720, which is set inside of a video game console, Banjo Land, a museum featuring a ton of Easter eggs and assets from the past 2 games, the Jigazeum, which is a large stadium, and finally the Terranium of Terra, which is a giant terranium with weird plants. So in the past, like I said, Banjo-Kazooie would enter a world and encounter the various googly-eyed inhabitants and learn what was troubling them, and helping them would result in getting a Jiggy. But now the worlds are just empty husks, and the inhabitants are characters played by the classic Banjo characters we know and love. For instance, in the Nutty Acres world, Mumbo Jumbo is now a struggling farmer on the acorn farm, while Humba Wumba plays his wife. Klungo plays a farmhand, and Bottles plays a pilot. And their roles change depending on the world you're in. There are new characters that appear in the world as well as in Showdown Town. There's Trophy Thomas, a speed freak who can challenge Banjo and Kazooie to complete the log challenges in a fast time. Piddles the cat, Gruntilda's new sidekick who she kicks a lot. And finally there's Pink Lid, a pig in charge of the Showdown Town Police Department. Each world also gets an intro video, which for some reason is a parody of an old TV show, although it doesn't always make sense. For example, Banjo Land's intro is a parody of The Love Boat, and Nutty Acres is Dallas. The only one that makes sense for the most part is the Terranium of Terror, since it's a parody of Lost in Space, and it's kind of a space theme level, so 1 out of 5. After making your way through the worlds, you receive 2 challenges back in Spiral Mountain. First, there's Log's final challenge, which you must complete 6 challenges, but all with 1 vehicle. During these challenges, Log ends each section off with quiz questions, as is typical for the series, but it does feel like they kind of just shoved this in here rather than to do something creative like the Furnace Fun or the Tower of Tragedy from the last games. Also, getting the question right just takes time off your final score, so whatever. After beating Log's challenge, you get Gruntilda's final battle, where you must take 1 vehicle in tow and fight 5 of her vehicles. Once you bring her down, the game's over. Banjo and Kazooie get the deed to Spiral Mountain, while Gruntilda gets stuck in Log's video game factory and vows to create a deadly game as revenge in a sequel that will never happen. Oh, and Log gives us back our moveset from the original games as a final middle finger to the fanbase. I knew, the minute I saw this scene, that Banjo was dead. That people were not going to be receptive of this game, at least not in a positive light, and that any chance of seeing the Baron Bird again was lost. But this ending makes me want to punch a glass window out, because it's like Rare is acting all smug here. They're like, yeah, you see that box over there with all your moves? Maybe if you give us another shot, we'll let you play a true sequel to Banjo-Tooie, but maybe. When all I want to do is scream at the top of my lungs here and say, why the hell did you make this game with vehicles? Like, why? So, how did I like the story? Well, it's incredibly lackluster compared to what happened in Tooie. I know a lot of people felt that Tooie was too dark in spots, but like, nothing happens in Nuts and Bolts. There are no interesting new characters to meet along the journey, since all the worlds are just recycling the cast members that we're already familiar with. And because the new game mechanics, most of the original cast has been sidelined with nothing to do. Mumbo now runs a garage, and Humba sells blueprints, and Bottles can give you tutorial help if you really want to for basic actions, but he doesn't teach you moves. Considering how helpful and interesting these characters were in the last game, it feels weird to see them in these lesser roles. Banjo-Tooie also introduced a ton of new characters, from Jolly Roger, Terry, Welder, King Cole, Mr. Patch, Mrs. Boggy, the kids, Mrs. Bottles, Heggy. There was so many more. Yet here there was no effort to create characters unique to any of the game worlds. And as a villain, Gruntilda doesn't do anything interesting either. She randomly builds new enemies called Gruntbots, seemingly at random once Banjo and Kazooie start their quest, and then she spends the whole game right in the town square in Showdown Town. She doesn't kill anyone, hurt anyone, or do anything villainous. In the past, she's kidnapped Tootie, and in the last game, she killed Bottles, burnt down Banjo's house, and took the light force out of King Jingling. Also, I like the meta references from the last 2 games, but now it's like the game and all of its characters flat out know that this is a video game, and that type of humor gets old fast. It worked well in the past games because they made meta references less frequent, but here it's like every other line is a clear reference to the fact that this is all a game, so it's hard to get invested in atmosphere when the game keeps breaking down the immersion. So what are you doing once you enter each world, since now the platforming has been thrown out the window? Well, the goal of each world is still to find all the Jiggies. However, each world is broken up into several acts, and these acts contain missions for Banjo and Kazooie to tackle, or occasionally battle Gruntilda. The main goal is to find the NPC characters on the map and talk to them, begin a mission to obtain the Jiggy. The whole run to the marker on your map completely removes the aspect of exploration of past titles. In the last 2 games, you had to look around every nook and cranny to figure out where the Jiggies were, but that's been streamlined. Once you talk to a character, you'll take part in a challenge, such as a race, a transport, escort mission, or battles. The races can be with cars, boats, or planes, while the transport missions have you trying to bring an object to a set point in the level in a set time. And the battle stuff has you battling a boss such as Mr. Patch again, or holding a position and stopping the onslaught of enemies. Most of the missions tend to be races, for the most part, with the least amount of missions being the ones that require you to battle something. Now, these missions fall into 2 tiers of challenges. There's Player's Choice, in which you can build a vehicle from scratch or use a pre-made blueprint and then add to it, while the other are Log's Choices, in which Log provides you with a vehicle that you can't edit, or at least you think you can't, but more on that in a bit. The Player Choice ones are the most creative, because it's up to you to figure out the best way to customize your vehicle, and honestly, this gameplay mechanic is not terrible. Oh sure, it doesn't belong in a Banjo-Kazooie game, but I'd be lying if I said the vehicle building system was trash. There's a satisfying feeling to building the perfect racing vehicle or designing a vehicle to carry something a great distance in mere seconds. Each vehicle needs a cockpit, an engine, and fuel, but the rest is up to you. You can get really creative, and the design studio for building is really easy to use, and the game's mission provides slight hints into what vehicles you should build, so you're never stuck figuring it out completely on your own. There's a nice trial and error to this system. Not getting enough speed and when racers are passing you by, then add more engines, maybe a jet. The downside here is that all the vehicles have their own physics, which means that you have to make vehicles that stand proportionally, otherwise they're going to fall over and not function the way you want. There's a bit of a learning curve in the early hours, but once you play around with it, it's very intuitive. The log missions act as a break from letting your creativity do all the work, as log provides you with the only vehicle you can use. And like I said, you would assume that you cannot edit these vehicles, because isn't that what's setting these apart from the player's choice missions? Well, while you can't add things to these vehicles, you can in fact edit them and take things off. And in some cases, this makes the log missions way easier. For instance, in Banjo-Land here, there's a mission where you have to ride this big motorcycle thing and perform tricks. It's pretty easy, but the last trick requires you to get this great height, which can be tricky. But it's no issue, because you can just detach the seat and leave the spring on the bottom of it and rocket into the sky and complete the mission. And sometimes there are parts of the log vehicles that are just aesthetic designs and not necessary at all, so you can just rip them off. Like this mission with the pizza delivery car. Like, why do I need the word pizza spelt out on top of the car? It's just adding more weight to the vehicle. The one big negative that I have to talk about is the collision detection with the other vehicles. In race missions, it's extremely easy to bump into other racers. So instead of bouncing off of them, you'll often get clipped onto them and stuck next to them. This can happen on any geometry in the world itself and pretty much grind you to a halt as you try to break away. This doesn't happen a whole lot, and knowing about it beforehand makes you think twice before you do anything. Just don't bump into anything and you'll be fine. Each mission is also broken down into a 3-tiered reward system. Some missions are time-based, while others are based on how many points you score or how much damage you or a mission-critical object takes. Getting the least amount of points or taking too long just gives you some notes. Getting the correct amount of points or completion time gets you a Jiggy and the notes, while exceeding the points or finishing fast gets you a Trophy Thomas. And each time you get a Trophy Thomas, you receive 1/4 of a Jiggy, so you need to complete 4 altogether to gain 1 real Jiggy. The worlds still have musical notes and Jinjos, though their functions here are a far cry from how these assets worked in past games. The musical notes are used to buy vehicle parts and blueprints from Humba back in Showdown Town, and you can honestly beat the whole game without ever buying a thing, making notes a complete afterthought. The only thing you might want to buy are the stat upgrades, which I'll talk about in a bit. The Jinjos are still scattered around in each act, but with a helpful little gadget you can find exactly where they are, and each one presents you with a small challenge. You might have to race them or hit a certain speed, or blast them out of an area. Beating a Jinjo mission grants you a Jinjo coin that you use in Showdown Town, and I'll explain more about that in a second. Speaking of Showdown Town, let's talk about how that area works in relation to everything else. There are notes scattered around here, as well as some which require you to climb poles, walk across tight ropes and swim, and hell, even access hard-to-reach areas. You know, platforming stuff. Aside from that, the majority of what you do in Showdown Town is the monotonous task of banking your Jiggies. Unlike in the past games, completing a mission is not enough for you to physically obtain the Jiggy. Nope, you have to find the vending machine that corresponds to the world in which you got it, then bring the actual Jiggy back to the bank in the center of town. Now don't get me wrong, it's hilarious to stuff the trolley with a batch of Jiggies and watch them fly up into the bank, but the whole process just is unnecessary. Like, why can't I just collect the Jiggy within the world? That's how it always worked before. And you have to do this with the Trophy Thomas Jiggies as well, adding to it. The other highlight of Showdown Town would be Boggy's Gym, where you pay the bear to raise Banjo's stats, including speed, strength, and stamina. However, the only stat worth investing into is the speed one, because it makes Banjo move a hell of a lot faster. And with no talent trot, you're going to need to move around town faster, since you can only use the trolley and it's pretty slow. The strength is meaningless because you never fight things outside of vehicle combat, and stamina is worthless because you can't die. Yep, even if Banjo's health hits 0 or you drown, the game just refills his health and you get back up and proceed on your way. There's no game over screen. Dying on a mission will fail you automatically, though since you're in a vehicle 99% of the time, it's highly unlikely that you're going to die on a mission, since Banjo never loses his health while he's in a vehicle, no matter what happens to it. King Jingling returns, and he's running a bingo game, and this is where the Jinjo coins come into use. You receive a specific colored Jinjo coin based on the Jinjo who gave it to you, and you use it to fill up spots on the board. Completing a certain row and columns nets you either notes or vehicle parts. This works okay, but because the better vehicle parts are in the longer rows, you'll almost be at the end game before you can grab them. And finally, there's Klungo's Arcade, which has you playing a simple side-scrolling game in which you jump over obstacles. This is alright for the most part, nothing you're going to be itching to get back to, though the one negative is that this minigame can crash, causing you to have to restart. And when I say crash, I don't mean that it's buggy like the game is buggy, it's a part of the fact that Klungo made this, and it's buggy as part of the experience, so it crashes. But it sucks when you're near the end of a level and it just goes out on you. But now I need to talk about something that, honestly, I didn't know how to bring up. I've laid out how the game functions, and from what I described, it seems fairly functional. You go into worlds, collect Jiggies, there's 2 types of missions dictating what you must do, whatever that is you're building, whether that's your own vehicles or having one provided. However, I'm going to come right out and say it. This game is broken, or at least I think it's broken. Let me explain. There are a ton of details of how to cheat the design of this game. I know I mentioned that the log vehicles that you can edit, but this is more serious than that. There are some missions that you can break clean in half. For instance, there is a player choice mission late in Nutty Acres where you have to transport nuts from one side of the level to the other. And you need the bigger ones to score more points. And so you're probably thinking, okay, let me build a vehicle with a big tray, maybe a cage over it to support the nuts, and maybe a sticky bomb to grab a few and fly back. Well, no, because you can break the nut vacuum off of its hinges, put that in your tray, and bring it to the nuts, ending the mission in seconds. Or, when you fight the first Gruntilda fight, the very first Gruntilda fight, you have to blast the nut out of her car. That sounds bad. At this point in the game, it's early, and so you might not have a ton of weapons to put on a vehicle, so you'll arm yourself with what you have and try your best. This might take a lot of time, and you might not even get the Trophy Thomas just the Jiggy. However, you can just jump out of your car, head towards it, and use Kazooie's wrench to grab the nut right out of the car. Again, doesn't sound nice. Hell, even during the last Grunty battle, you can cheese one of the fights. I mentioned that she jumps in different vehicles, and one of them is a tank, which means you're probably thinking of building a vehicle that has a ton of weapons in order to blast through the tank armor. Well, you could do that, or you could wait till she jumps up in the tank, walk under it as Banjo, and whack her with the wrench, which dislodges her in seconds. Seriously, there are more examples of this, but if I show any more, this video will go on for hours. And I can't tell whether this is just oversight from Rare, not coding certain objects to be affected by the wrench, or whether they left this in to reward players for thinking outside the box. And then there's the way you can break progressing through Showdown Town. The town is broken up into several districts, and the only way to reach some of them is to win the Grunty battles to get new parts for the trolley. For example, there are a ton of slopes in the first area, and the only way to get past them is to obtain the high grip wheels after you do the first few levels in Nutty Acres. This gets progress around the town so that you're accessing different areas when the game wants you to, and when you have the upgrades for the trolley. The gating is done primarily to stop you from getting the vehicle crates that are scattered around Showdown Town and contain good late game vehicle parts. However, I hope you're sitting down, but you can go wherever you want really easily in Showdown Town as soon as the game starts. During my record time, I spent the first video about 40 to 50 minutes grabbing 40 of the 50 vehicle parts that are in the area. Now you're probably thinking, oh Chris, you must have glitches, or you must have glitched something or went out of bounds or did something fancy to get around these gates. But I'm here to tell you that a blind monkey with one hand could do this glitch. So the trick to getting around town involves the trolley. When you put something into the trolley, like say a bench or a box, Banjo can stand on top of it and then highlight the trolley itself, which makes it hover. And using this in a well-timed fashion will cause it to levitate, and you can go anywhere. So it's very easy to get into an area you shouldn't, grab the vehicle crate, activate the warp pad, and take it back to Mumbo's Motors. Like I said, you get some good stuff from these crates since you're not supposed to have them until way later, so you'll have access to more fuel, better engines, higher grip wheels, and the like. And you can easily break the first few missions with this stuff. Now there are a few crates hidden behind laser wiring that require you to have the laser weapon to deactivate, which you don't get until the final levels. So at least these crates are still gated. Nope, of course they're not. Couldn't say that with a straight face. They can be glitched as well in a really simple method. Just place the trolley up against the gate with the inside of the trolley facing it. Then get out of the car, then grab the crate through the gate with the wrench, and the crate will auto try to place itself into the tray. After that, then enter a level, exit, and you'll be back in your trolley with the crate nestled in the tray, awaiting its trip to Mumbo's. And again, I can't tell whether Rare didn't playtest this stuff out or they left this in as a reward to people who messed around with it. Honestly, I think the wrench is just not coded correctly. It can grab anything, at any time, and it's what causes 87% of these issues to be prevalent. Like, why is the wrench still highlighting the trolley when you stand on top of something in the tray? Or why do critical objects like the nut machine or the nut in Grunty's car still get highlighted by the wrench? That just seems like oversight. But what's more confusing is the game received updates after launch. There were bug fixes, and hell, there was even DLC, but this glitch and the short-sighted design flaws are still in the game. I'm at a loss for why Rare just didn't patch them out. I mean, they don't break the game itself too severely. It's not like you can use these tricks to beat the game in 5 minutes or skip whole levels, but this still makes the game feel sloppy and untested. It's like reading a great essay that has a bunch of spelling errors. In the end, I guess Rare felt it wasn't the time to fix this stuff because it's been over 10 years and no change. Presentation-wise, things are a lot better. Banjo and the cast have all received more radical redesigns than fans were happy with. I generally like the new art style. Sure, the design is more blocky, but they still look cartoonish for the most part. The worlds this time, while a bit too large and barren, have bright, vibrant colors, and a few stand out with the features in them, like the green hills of Nutty Acres or the circuitry of Logbox. Dialogue is still random gibberish, and thankfully it sounds just like the original game, so no loss there. The greatest element by far, though, is the music. Grant Kirkhope returns, and he's using a full orchestra this time to create some of the most memorable and catchy tunes in the series. And a few tracks are reused, but they've all been re-recorded with the orchestra, making it sound better than it ever has. The new tracks from Nutty Acres and Logbox are unique, and will definitely get stuck in your head. Though by far, the track for Banjo Land is the bomb, as it's a mashup of a bunch of songs from the past two games. So what's my final takeaway from this game? While the idea of having a game in which you complete missions by creating vehicles and using them in a variety of ways is incredibly fun, it's just not a Banjo-Kazooie game. No matter how much fun I had in building something or beating a mission in record time, there was always this nagging feeling in the back of my head that what I'm playing was the 8-year-long awaited sequel to Banjo-Tooie. and it felt wrong. As an original IP, this idea is solid and I think shows a ton of progress, but sticking Banjo and Kazooie into the mix feels like a corporate decision to make the game sell well under a banner of an established, albeit dormant, IP. Though I guess this isn't the first time Rare was forced to use an established IP to help sell an original idea they had. I think we all remember a game about a certain fox and his adventures that sounds remarkably like how this game mixed two things that should have never encountered each other. Nuts and Bolts has its moments, but the whole experience is brought down by this being a Banjo-Kazooie game. They just don't belong here. I understand that the industry is filled with a ton of sequels that never change and that always rely on the same core gameplay design with slight tweaks, and from that perspective I could understand why Rare would want to do something different from older games. But like I said way at the beginning, Banjo and Kazooie had 2 mainline games, and then it went into hiatus for a decade. I don't think fans put down Tooie and were like, you know what I hate? That Banjo's been a platformer for so long. I think they need to jazz that up a little. A better idea would have been to make the real Banjo 3 and maybe use Nuts and Bolts as a spin-off down the road. The real shame is what happened to Banjo after this. Well, after the release of this game, some fans started to wonder, myself included, if the series would be back permanently. But after the initial fallout to how this game was received by the fanbase, those hopes were quickly dashed. Banjo went back into hibernation and he's still there to this day. Sure, he got back into the spotlight briefly when he came to Super Smash Bros., and there were rumors of one of the early titles or a new game coming to the Switch thanks to Nintendo being all buddy-buddy with Microsoft these days. However, these rumors ended up being just that, and now Banjo is in cold storage, probably forever. Again, this game is not bad. Even with the glitches and the game-breaking mechanics that can make it easier than I think the developers intended, it's all just so disappointing. This was the next mainline Banjo game, and instead of improving on what Tooie brought to the table and trying to redefine the franchise for the modern era, Rare chose to take a hacksaw, strip it down to nothing except for the familiar characters, and create a whole new game around them. But what makes me angry is the most smug attitude that Rare has by having a ton of jokes in game about how platformers are dated and no one would want to play them. The elitist view makes me think that Rare didn't understand the fanbase at all, and instead made a game they assumed we would want rather than the game we wanted. So, thanks for watching, and the 12 Days of ChrisBondmas will continue.